talk to me about your process of writing then. Is it for you, is it an intuition thing or is it an intentional thing? Do you like put time aside for it to sit down and then like things like you mentioned before, it comes from within, or is it something that kind of as you live through life, you find a need to express and then that kind of intuition comes out for you to sit down and express? How does it work for you?
Um, for me, I've never needed to kind of, like I say, set myself writing time. I've always, when I wanted to write, I've written. And when I haven't wanted to, I haven't. I mean, the thing for me is that all of my writing, some people write separate poems in a way, right? With me, it's always about, I have a big idea that I want to write. So each of my books has been about a particular idea or theme. So what I've done with all of them is kind of gone, right, I know I want to write about this and I'll keep writing about it until I've written it out. And it's done. And then I've been lucky enough to always have people who wanted to publish my work. And so I kind of go, right, I've got this book, there it is. And so, you know, I've written books about where I grew up, written a couple of books about my daughters. I've written books about particulars, one about politics, one about exile. So it's like I have an idea and then I do all of that. And then when it's done, it's done. And I don't necessarily, like I said, I don't have writer's block. I don't beat myself up about it. When I was younger, and I don't think I said this earlier in a way, students who kind of go, I've got writer's block. I mean, my answer to that is, if you have got writer's block and you never write ever again, so what? Right? You do, so you don't. It's like I wanted to be a painter for a while, but I stopped painting. So what? I stopped. And if you are a writer, you will keep writing. And so with me, I kind of, students who've got writer's block, I think it kind of, I'm aware of this because I've said it so many times. But when people go, I've got writer's block, I'm really worried. You know, the expected answer is, don't worry, it'll come back. My answer is, well, maybe you're never going to write there again.
Just scared of you.
No, maybe I'm never going to write ever again. There's more to life than this. But if you're a writer, well, you'll write again. It'll happen. And so with me, that kind of business of, I never needed to make myself write because I'd be like, oh, I've got this idea. I'm excited about this idea. I'm going to write about it. And then when I'm done with it, I have, as you get older, you have more faith in that fact, right? If you're 22 and you haven't been able to write for 3 months, that's a bit of a bigger chunk of your life where you're going, oh, fucking hell, I'm never going to write. Maybe I'm not. For me, you get older and you go, oh, I didn't write much for 6 months. Yeah, but that's happened 4 times. And I've always gone back to writing. So you feel less stressed about it as you get older.
Yeah. I think when you're younger, you identify so much with your kind of a creativity. You go, I'm a poet or I'm a writer. And so when you don't do that, I think it kind of asks questions of what am I then? You know, if I can't do this thing that I thought so much of myself was invested in, what am I? On that point, actually, you mentioned about publishing and about publishing books. And I wanted to ask 2 kind of questions or kind of mesh into one. So first, when you do publish and you get, I know there's a lot of stuff like this idea that once you publish something, it belongs to the world. You know, like your intention of it is one thing, but how the world receives it is another thing completely. So how do you deal with that kind of idea and also being misunderstood through your writing, whether it's poetry or whether it's any other books that you've written?
I think there's lots of different answers to that, in as much as on one level, again, this is to do with privilege to a certain extent, in as much as you have a book come out And God knows, so I mean, all my students would love to have a book come out. You know, I know that. I know when my first book came out, I was like, oh, book come out. And then you have a few books come out, and you're a bit like, it's. Don't get me wrong, it's still just as exciting, but you're used to it, right? You know what I mean? So you kind of go, you become a writer, and by becoming, when you have become a writer, whatever that means, you know that you have a book come out, and you know that it's exciting, and then you know it goes into the world. And for most writers, most of the time, that book is greeted by complete and utter silence and indifference.
Yeah.
Except you know that some people out there are reading it. And for me, the job's done on one level when the book's been written and you see it and you hold it and you go, that's my book. Then it's out in the world. And like I say, it's disingenuous to say, and then I don't care, because of course I care, but I don't spend any time thinking about it. I kind of go, wow, hooray, I done that. That's the game I played. There's my book. I feel lucky, privileged, all of those things to have a book out. But at the same time, it's done. Okay, what am I going to do next? In a way that, you know, I mean, humans, for better or worse, are always what about the next thing, isn't it? It's like, you know, you might have 400 pairs of shoes, but you're going, I just need that. I need that one more thing. And so, you know, you're thinking about the next book, or you're thinking about, hopefully you think I've done a decent job of the last book, but it's done. And what people make of it, I've had people misunderstand in reviews and misread what I've been doing with my books. But I mean, on one level, that's part of the privilege of having the book out there in the first place, the privilege to be misunderstood.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's so important. That's so true. Because I think, like, you know, you get so caught up in the creation of it, you might think like you control people's opinion a bit, when it's actually a privilege for them to be able to look at it. Because, you know, like I speak for a lot of people my age, all we want is a book to hold, you know, to be able to someone else to read it. And even if they misunderstand it, you know, that's kind of okay. Okay, another idea that I had that I wanted to ask you about was the role of failure in this journey that we're all going to go on. And what advice would you have for people watching around my age, or even a little bit older, just beginning their creative journey, broadly, about how failure plays a role in that journey? Like, you know, does it, you know, because a lot of the time I feel like, you know, we take failure as such a definitive full stop, when actually it's a comma. You know, it's like, okay, this happened and then this happened. You know, I'm learning that as I get older. But from your experience, what advice would you give people on how to look at failure, even handle that in their journey?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, on one level, if you flip that, what is success? You know, in as much as, am I a successful poet? In the eyes of people who have got fewer books or not published in wherever, I'm successful. But what about me looking at someone, you know, going, oh, but they got more sales, more reviews, more this or that, the other. And so on one level, I think, certainly in the eyes of the world, an external judgment, failure is a very kind of relative thing. On one level, you can argue that all poets are failures, pretty much, right? In as much as I think, but like, you know, kind of every writer would like to be read by more people.
Yes, exactly.
To, you know, to be approved of or applauded or whatever more. So on one level, everyone's kind of going, oh,
I'm a very,
you know,
myself,
but I think kind of internally, that kind of business of failure, one of the things for me is that, like, going back to what I said about kind of editing and stuff with my students, is that you become a success by realizing how important failure is in the process. And what I mean by that is, when going back to talking about when I was a kid and starting writing, I mean, it'd be the same for you, same for everyone, right? You know, when you're young and you've got your first book where you're going, I'm going to put poems in here, and you've got 8 poems, and I remember this really clearly, and then going, oh, now I've got 15, and now I've got 18. Oh my God! And they're the only 18 poems you've got in the world, and you hold on to them, and they're super important. But the way that every writer becomes a better writer is by looking at 17 of them and going, they're failures. You know what I mean? This isn't as good as it could be. I didn't get this right. I mean, I think, again, one of the big things I always want students to be aware of is, whenever there's a writing deadline and the deadline says write 30 poems, I always say, don't kind of go 28, 29. Oh, I don't. It's write 100 and throw away 70, because then you've got choice, and then you've learned, and then so the 70 if we're talking about 100 for sake of argument, the 70 that are failures allow the 30 to succeed. But if you only write 30, it's kind of like a batting average, or whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean? But if 1 in 10 poems is decent, think how many you've got to fail at in order to succeed. And so the kind of the idea that there is success here and that there's failure here, I think they're completely connected, right? And if you are afraid to fail or afraid of failure, then you'll never succeed. You've got to always kind of go, it's part of the process, and kind of enjoy it, you know. I mean, certainly for me, as I'm writing a lot of poems at the moment, and I'm no different from any other writer. I write this much and I go, that line stinks, that line, can I change it? And then you try and change it, and then you go, I want to keep it because it's in there. But actually, the moment of liberation is when you just go, no, delete it. And that's when you go, hooray.
Yeah. Kill your darlings, right? I think, okay, so on that point, that's getting rid of that 70 failures, right? This is a personal question. Me, how do you get to a point where you get better at that? You get better at the process of eliminating and editing, because I feel like that's the really, like you said before, the difference between a good writer and a great writer is the ability to recognize the poems that doesn't quite fit into, or like fit into the idea what they're trying to say. Like you said, you have that big idea. In that big idea, there's so many plot points, but it's like, which ones really do align properly, right? So how do you get better at the recognizing those 70 failures and stripping back and being comfortable in yourself and doing that?
By doing.
You're almost coming back to that one. And there's
it really, I don't know. I mean, just by doing it and doing it and doing it. I mean, I think that I'm a average writer, but I think I'm a really, really, really good editor. And some people, I guess, you know, are much better writers, and they spend less time editing. With me, I know that I can blur something on the page, but if I edit it and work on it for however long, 100 edits, whatever, I can make something good. I think you can teach writing, you know, in the way that I talked about having writing games and ideas and reading stuff. I think teaching your question, of course, how do you become a better editor? How do you know? That's so individual. I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I wish I could teach people that. I guess, in my own experience, through figuring out what I like, what works for me, and what makes me excited, as a teacher, I would say to people, make sure you turn on your bullshit detector, because certainly in my experience, like I just said to you, I can write something and go, yeah, it's okay. Actually, I know that my bullshit detector, if I put it on, will go, whoa, that's bullshit. And that business of people only settling for what is satisfying, working best, all these abstract terms, how do you evaluate that? I don't know. But that business of being clear about, maybe it's about looking at what you've done and going, that worked and that worked and that worked, and that's what I want my stuff to be like. So maybe it's about kind of looking at stuff that you feel pleased with, and kind of in some way going, this is not at that level for whatever reasons. But the poems I'm writing at the moment, it's I can look at some of them and go, oh, I did my best with that, but no, it just ain't happening as well.
On that point, actually, how do you stay close to the reason that you started writing? I think, like, over time, I think people, at least from my experience a little bit also, like, when I started writing, it was all like being about inspiration, being inspired by these poets that I'd read, and I'm like, oh my God, these are like amazing ideas, and they have their own way of saying it, and like what life they must live to be able to come out with poetry like this. But as you start writing, you kind of move away from that because you begin to live your life, and it's your expression and it's your way of looking at the world. And then, I guess as you start performing or you start doing, you move even further away from that kind of kid who's sitting in, like you were mentioning, in that library, reading those Chinese poetry. It's kind of, you move away from that in a sense. But I think to always discover that, to keep on going, to keep on persevering over time, is to remind yourself the reason you started writing poetry, so you don't get too moved away to like the kind of like, the fame or like whatever kind of glory you associate with the pursuit. How have you remained, in your mind, cognizant about the why you started doing poetry?